My name is David Miller. I was 37 when I lost everything: my job, my trust in people, and the belief that family would always be there. I exposed fraud at the company I worked for, thinking I was doing the right thing. They fired me. My own parents said I was reckless. My sister called me dramatic. My girlfriend distanced herself before I even hit the ground. And then, just when I thought life had broken me for good, I won $33.5 million in the lottery. But I didn't feel joy. I felt a strange, quiet grief, because deep down I knew the money couldn't fix what was already broken. So I stayed silent. I told no one, and instead I gave them one last chance not to love the version of me with wealth, but the one with nothing. What happened next didn't just show me who they were. It showed me who I was finally ready to become. The morning I lost my job was colder than usual for early March in Minneapolis. I remember the biting wind cutting across my face as I walked out of the Nexora building for the last time. My box of things, family photos, a coffee mug, a stress ball I never used, felt heavier than it should have. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. Most of them had already made their choice, siding with Claire and pretending they hadn't seen the numbers I'd reported. I had done the right thing. At least that's what I kept telling myself. I'd uncovered a misallocation of funds so obvious it was almost laughable. When I confronted Claire, she looked at me like I was a stain on her designer blouse. 2 weeks later, HR called me in. They didn't even try to cover it up. Budget cuts, they said. My performance had been slipping. I knew it was retaliation, and it stung more than I expected. I spent the next few days applying to jobs I didn't want, staring at the ceiling at night, wondering what the hell I was doing. No one from my family called. They didn't even know. I hadn't told them anything. I didn't need to hear my dad tell me I should have kept my mouth shut, or my mom suggesting I go crawling back to Claire with an apology. On a rainy Friday, after submitting my 7th job application of the day, I walked to the grocery store just to get out of the apartment. There was this long line at checkout, and I found myself staring at the bright-colored scratch-offs behind the counter. I never bought them. Waste of money. But I had $10 left in cash, and I thought, what the hell? I asked for 2 quick picks, half joking with the cashier that maybe I'd disappear to California if I won. I didn't check the numbers right away. The tickets ended up crumpled at the bottom of my coat pocket. 3 days later, during a quiet Monday afternoon, I pulled them out and checked the numbers online, not expecting anything more than a couple of matching digits. But every single number lined up. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I refreshed the page 5 times, checked another website, rechecked the date, same result: $33.5 million after taxes. My hands were shaking. My throat went dry. I remember pacing around my apartment like a maniac, mumbling out loud, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't call anyone. Not my mom, not Amy, not even Ryan, my best friend. The first person I called was Mark Benson, the attorney I'd worked with when I bought my condo 5 years ago. He was calm even when I sounded like I was on the verge of a breakdown. He congratulated me, told me to stay quiet, and scheduled a meeting at his office the next morning. By noon the next day, we had the framework in place. We created a blind trust to collect the winnings. Mark walked me through everything: taxes, investment options, what not to do, how to keep the wolves at bay. He warned me that people would come out of the woodwork: old friends, forgotten relatives, fake charities, everyone. He said the worst part might be discovering who the people closest to me really were. That stuck with me, because deep down I already knew. I had spent my whole life being the backup plan, the one they called when they needed help moving or someone to co-sign a lease. They never showed up for me. Not when I was sick, not when I lost my job, not when I broke my wrist and couldn't pay rent in college. But now that I was suddenly rich, I knew they'd all come crawling. unless they thought I was still broke. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about it. What if I didn't tell them? What if I told them I lost my job? I was struggling and I needed help. Would they step up? Would any of them be there for me without knowing I had millions in the bank? I knew the answer, but I needed to see it. I spent the next few days crafting the story. I told Ryan first. He was the only one I trusted completely. When I told him about the lottery, he stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Then he laughed. Then he panicked. "You can't just test people like that," he said. "What if someone actually needs help and can't give it? What if it backfires?" "I know," I told him. "But I need to do this for me." Reluctantly, he agreed. He promised to keep it a secret. We made a list of 6 people: my parents, my younger sister, Amy, my aunt Rachel, my girlfriend Sophie, and my cousin Michael, the one who'd been raised with us after his parents died. Michael was a wild card, quiet, distant. We hadn't talked much lately, but something told me he'd surprise me. The plan was simple. I'd tell each of them that I had lost my job and needed $5,000 to keep my condo. No pressure, just a request. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't guilt trip. I'd let them show me who they really were. And then I'd decide who stayed in my life. Ryan showed up the next morning with 2 coffees and that look on his face like he was about to tell me I'd lost my mind. I hadn't told him the full plan yet, just that I needed his help with something sensitive. We sat in my apartment, the curtains drawn, the air stale from too many sleepless nights and takeout containers. I handed him the printout of the trust agreement Mark had finalized and let him read through it. His eyebrows rose with every paragraph. "You really won this," he said, not even blinking. I did. "Jesus Christ, Dave." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling like he was trying to make sense of the universe. "So what's the plan now? Buy a boat and disappear?" Not exactly. I took a breath and told him everything. The idea, the test, the people, every name on the list. My voice cracked a little when I got to my mom. Something about saying it out loud made it feel heavier. When I finished, he stared at me for a long moment. Then he set his coffee down and said, "That's messed up, man. I mean, I get it, but you're asking people to prove something they might not even be capable of. What if someone's genuinely broke? What if they love you but can't help?" "I know," I said. "I'm not expecting handouts. I just want to see if they even try, if they care, if they ask the right questions or just shut me down." He rubbed his chin, still skeptical. "And if they fail, then I walk away." Silence stretched between us. He looked around my place like he was seeing it for the first time, like he was suddenly aware of how empty it felt. After a while, he nodded. "Okay, I'll help, but only if you promise not to hold it against them forever. People screw up. People panic. Fair." We sat there in quiet agreement, the kind only 2 people with decades of history can share. Then we got to work. We made a list. 6 names. 6 relationships that had shaped my life in one way or another. First was my dad, Robert, a retired electrician who spent most of his time now watching cable news and criticizing the world from his recliner in Duluth. He wasn't a bad man, just emotionally unavailable, like someone had hit the mute button on his ability to connect. Then my mom, Linda, a retired nurse who still volunteered at the church clinic. She was warm on the surface, always smiling, but that smile never quite reached her eyes when it came to me. She loved me in her way, but her love had terms. Next was Amy, my younger sister. 4 years younger, lives in Los Angeles, now working in digital marketing. Instagram perfect life. Always had a flair for drama and a way of making every conversation about her. She hadn't called in weeks. Then there was Rachel, my mom's younger sister. A widow, comfortably well off, and always the first to post Bible verses online. She helped raise me when I was little but drifted once Amy became the family favorite. Fifth on the list was Sophie, my girlfriend of 2 years. We met at a fundraiser and clicked fast. She was smart, driven, ambitious. But lately I'd started to notice little cracks. The way she shifted when I talked about work stress. The way she'd ask about my 401k but never about my day. And finally, Michael. My cousin, but more like a foster brother. His parents died in a car crash when he was 10 and he came to live with us. We were never close, not really. He was quiet, brooding, kept to himself. But he always had my back in the weirdest, most unexpected ways. That's the order, Ryan asked, pointing at the list. No, just the names. I'll go in whatever order feels natural. We discussed the approach. I'd call or visit each one, explain that I was in trouble. I'd say I lost my job, burned through savings, and needed a short-term loan to keep my place. No mention of the lottery, obviously. Just a man down on his luck asking for help. Ryan would be my fallback. If anyone asked to talk to someone about the situation, he'd back up the story. We even drafted a fake email from my HR department confirming my termination just in case. You realize this could backfire, he said while typing it up. Someone might call the bluff. Let them. We spent the afternoon rehearsing. I practiced my tone, the pauses, the right balance of desperation and pride. I didn't want to sound pathetic. I just wanted to sound real. By the time he left that night, the plan was airtight. My stomach was a knot of nerves and something else I couldn't name. Excitement, maybe. Dread. Probably both. After Ryan walked out, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the list. Robert, Linda, Amy, Rachel, Sophie, Michael, 6 people, 6 chances. I picked up my phone, hovered over the call button, then set it down again. Tomorrow. I'd start tomorrow. I called my dad first. His number was still at the top of my favorites list, though I couldn't remember the last time we'd had an actual conversation that lasted more than 5 minutes. He picked up on the 3rd ring. Yeah. Hey, Dad, it's me. David. Everything all right? There was always that pause with him, like he expected bad news every time I called, or maybe he just didn't know how to fill the space between us anymore. I'm okay. Just, can I talk to you for a sec, shoot? I forced a breath, kept my voice steady. So I got laid off last month. The startup I was working for cut a bunch of people. Things have been tight since then, and I've been trying to keep up with everything, but I'm falling behind. I heard him shifting, maybe settling deeper into his recliner. That sucks. Sorry to hear that. I waited, hoping for a follow-up, maybe something like, do you need anything? But all I got was silence. Thing is, rent's due next week and I'm short. I need $5,000 to cover it and keep things afloat while I figure things out. I was hoping you might be able to help me out. Just a loan. I'll pay you back. His sigh came long and slow. I could picture him rubbing his forehead the way he always did when I brought up money. David, you know your mother and I are on a fixed income now. Retirement doesn't stretch like it used to. I know I said and I meant it. I wasn't expecting a blank check, but I thought he'd at least ask a few questions. We just bought that new Buick and your mom's got that dental work coming up. I've been moving money around to cover those. Timing's bad. Right. Yeah, I get it. There was a pause, like he wasn't sure what else to say. You tried asking Amy, I'll figure it out, I said quickly, not wanting to drag it out. Just wanted to ask. Thanks anyway. We hung up a few seconds later. No questions about my mental state, no suggestion that I come visit, no offer to talk things through. Just a polite out and a redirect to my younger sister. I sat there staring at my phone for a long time. I should have felt angry, maybe even hurt, but what I really felt was tired. It wasn't surprising. He'd always been that way, emotionally distant, more practical than present. Still, it stung. Later that evening, I texted Ryan to let him know how it went. No dice. Said he's broke from a car and Mom's teeth. Ryan replied fast. Bullshit. Your dad's been sitting on that pension and rental income for years. Exactly. A few hours later, I got a message from a friend of my mother's. She'd shared a photo of their new Buick SUV on Facebook with a caption about rewarding ourselves after a tough year, smiling at the dealership, holding keys like they'd won the lottery. I stared at the picture, the timeline fresh in my head. That car had been bought just 2 weeks ago, the same month I supposedly lost my job. Then came the real punch. A voicemail accidentally left when Dad tried to hang up after our call. I played it. He was talking to Mom in the background, voice muffled but unmistakably his. He's 37 and still calling us for handouts. Maybe if he stopped playing the victim all the time. My stomach dropped. That was it. That was how he saw me. Not as someone trying to get back on his feet. Not as his son. Just a nuisance. A weight. A failure. I didn't bother calling him back. There was nothing left to say. I crossed his name off the list, 1 down, 5 to go. I waited a day before calling my mom. I needed to cool off, and I figured if I called too soon after Dad, she'd already be primed with whatever spin he'd given her. I dialed her number around lunch on Sunday, knowing she'd be home from church and probably sitting at the kitchen table with her tea and crossword puzzle. "Hi, sweetheart," she answered, voice warm and high like she always did when she hadn't heard from me in a while. "Hey, Mom," I said, forcing my tone to stay even. "Got a minute?" "Of course. What's going on?" I took a breath, repeating the story I had crafted and practiced. I told her I'd been laid off, that severance had run out, and I was behind on rent. I said I didn't want to burden anyone, but I was trying to pull together enough to cover next month and was wondering if she might be able to help with a loan. 5,000, just until I got back on my feet. "Oh, honey, that's awful." I had no idea. Her voice dropped to that soft, motherly tone that used to comfort me as a kid when I had scraped knees or bad dreams. But I noticed she didn't ask how I was holding up. No questions about interviews or how long I'd been struggling. Just a blanket expression of concern. "That's a lot of money, David," she said after a pause. "I'd have to check our finances. Your dad's been moving some things around lately, and you know we've had those medical bills." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I get it. Just figured I'd ask." "Let me talk to your father, okay? And I'll look over the budget tonight. I want to help if I can." "Sure. Thanks, Mom." We talked for a few more minutes. She asked if I'd talked to Amy recently, and I lied, said not in a while. Then she told me about her new herb garden and how the basil was thriving, and I listened like a good son. When we hung up, I sat in silence watching the last bits of afternoon light crawl across the living room floor. 3 days passed. No word. On the 4th day, I got a text. "Sweetheart, I looked at everything and I really wish we could help. But your dad's meds are so expensive and the insurance barely covers anything. Between that and the dental work, we're stretched thin. I hope you understand." I read the message 3 times. It sounded kind, reasonable, like she hated to say no but genuinely couldn't do anything. And maybe part of me could have accepted that, if I didn't know the truth. Last month, Mom had wired Amy $2,000 for a trip to Cabo. I only knew because Amy had accidentally forwarded me the confirmation from Zelle and followed it with a laughing face emoji saying, "Oops, ignore that." Mom's treating me for my birthday, ha ha. That was their dynamic. Mom helped Amy without hesitation. paid for flights, chipped in on rent when Amy's startup gig didn't pan out, sent little care packages filled with boutique skincare. I got polite texts and once-a-year socks. It wasn't about the money, it was about what it represented. I wasn't the kind of son people helped. I was the one they congratulated for being independent because it was convenient not to have to worry about me. I didn't reply to her message. A day later she called. I let it ring. Another text came in. Just checking in. Love you. I stared at the screen. I believed she loved me in her own filtered, conditional way. But I also believed she wouldn't have lifted a finger even if I told her I was sleeping in my car. That night I opened my laptop and clicked through Amy's Instagram. She had posted a story from a rooftop pool in San Diego, a cocktail in hand. Sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. The caption said, "Family first always." I laughed bitter and low. Then I closed the screen. I crossed my mother's name off the list. 2 down, 4 to go. I FaceTimed Amy on a Thursday afternoon. I knew the time difference between Minneapolis and Los Angeles meant she was probably just finishing lunch. She answered quickly, her face filling the screen with perfect lighting and a background that looked suspiciously like a luxury condo. "Hey, stranger," she said, flashing her signature half-smile. "You look tired." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, been a rough few weeks. What's going on?" She was distracted, I could tell. Her eyes kept darting off screen like someone else was in the room or a show was playing quietly in the background. I gave her the same story I had given our parents. Job loss, struggling, need a little help. I didn't want to be dramatic, but I didn't sugarcoat it either. I said I needed $5,000 to stay afloat, just a loan. I'd pay her back as soon as I could. There was a pause after I said it, not long, but just long enough for me to know what was coming. "Oh, David, that's rough. I'm really sorry." Her voice shifted softer but not genuine, more like she had slipped into customer service mode. "I just think maybe it's time you figure out how to stand on your own. I mean, you're not a kid anymore." I stared at the screen, blinking. She smiled like she hadn't just kicked me in the chest. "I mean that with love," obviously, she added, brushing a hand through her hair. "You've always been smart. You'll land on your feet. Maybe this is like your rock-bottom moment before the comeback, you know?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe." We ended the call soon after. She didn't ask if I needed anything else. Didn't say she'd think about it. Just told me to keep her posted and sent a heart emoji after we hung up. I sat there for a few minutes, phone still in my hand, feeling like someone had pulled the floor out from under me. Amy and I used to be close, or at least I thought we were. We had shared bunk beds as kids, snuck into each other's rooms to complain about our parents, promised we'd always have each other's backs. But that was years ago. Somewhere along the line, she had swapped that version of us for a filtered, polished version of herself that didn't have room for messy truths. I opened Instagram later that night, more out of habit than curiosity. The first thing on my feed was a story from Amy, a boomerang of her clinking glasses with someone across a marble bar. The caption said, "Finally made it to Tulum," with a bunch of beach and sun emojis. I tapped through the story. Poolside drinks, ocean views, designer swimsuits, every shot carefully curated, perfectly lit, annoyingly flawless. One post showed her lounging in a cabana, sunglasses on, cocktail in hand. The caption read, "Self-care is not selfish." I stared at it for a long time. There it was, the truth laid bare in pixels and hashtags. It wasn't that she couldn't help. It was that she didn't want to. Helping me didn't fit the aesthetic. My problems were too real, too inconvenient. I didn't message her, didn't call again. Instead, I opened a folder on my desktop where I'd been keeping notes. I wrote down every conversation, every word, every excuse, not out of spite, out of clarity. If I ever started to doubt myself, I wanted the facts in front of me. I closed the laptop, stood up, and poured myself a drink. 3 left. Sophie and I met at our usual spot downtown, a small bistro on Hennepin that she liked because the lighting was good for photos. She was already seated when I arrived, flipping through something on her phone, a half-finished glass of rosé in front of her. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, leaning in with concern as I sat down. "You look tired." "Yeah, just been a rough couple weeks." She reached for my hand, her fingers soft, and manicured her brows, pulling together like she was bracing for bad news. "What's going on?" I kept my voice low and steady, told her the same story I'd told everyone else. Laid off, bills piling up, savings running out. I said I was looking for jobs but hadn't landed anything yet, and if things didn't turn around soon, I might have to give up my condo and crash with Ryan for a bit. Her face shifted just a little. The concern didn't vanish, but it cracked. "Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that bad," she said, slowly letting go of my hand. "I mean, why didn't you tell me earlier? I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could fix it before it got to this point." She nodded, looking down at her drink. Then she took a long sip and set the glass down carefully. "So what happens now? I'm trying to keep things afloat, but I need time, and I might have to make some temporary changes." She folded her hands on the table, staring at them. "David, I really care about you. You know that, right?" "Yeah, I know, but maybe we should take a little space just until things settle." I didn't answer right away. "I'm not saying I don't want to be with you," she rushed to add. "I just think with all this stress, it might be better if we each focus on ourselves right now." Right. Space. I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes, not from sadness, but from something colder. Confirmation that all of it was conditional, that love for her was a transaction. As long as I had something to offer, I was worth the investment. We finished the meal in near silence. She kissed my cheek when we parted, said we'd talk soon. I didn't argue. A few days later, Ryan showed up at my place unannounced, a printout in his hand, and his jaw tight with frustration. "You're not gonna like this," he said as he pushed the paper across the counter. "What is it?" "Sophie went to see a family law attorney, someone I know through Jen." I stared at him. "For what common law marriage? She wanted to know if she'd be entitled to anything if you broke up, considering you've lived together for over 2 years. My throat went dry. We weren't married, never even talked about it seriously. But Minnesota recognized common law in specific contexts, especially when cohabitation was long-term and finances were shared. "She thought you were broke," I said quietly. "Not when she met with the lawyer. This was a few weeks ago, when she still thought everything was fine." I sank onto the couch, heart pounding. So she was planning an exit strategy before she even knew anything was wrong. Ryan sat across from me, arms folded. "I'm sorry, man." I didn't reply. It was almost funny, if it weren't so pathetic. Sophie hadn't pulled away because I was struggling. She'd done it because I was no longer a guaranteed bet. She wanted out the moment risk entered the picture. I picked up my phone and blocked her number. No texts, no explanations. I was done. 2 left. Rachel picked up on the second ring. I hadn't called her in a while, but I knew she'd answer. She always liked to act like the rock of the family, the one who was there when no one else was. "David," she said, surprised but composed. "How are you? I'm hanging in," I replied. "Got a minute?" "Of course. What's going on?" I gave her the same rundown. Laid off, bills stacking up, savings drying up. I told her I was in a tough spot and needed $5,000 to keep from losing my place, just a loan. I promised to pay it back. Her pause was longer than anyone else's so far. David, I've already helped you so much over the years. She didn't say it cruelly, just flat, like reading from a ledger of emotional debt. I know, and I'm grateful. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. She sighed, then shifted gears. You know, sometimes I think you let things get to you too much. Life is hard for everyone, but some people just keep going. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I am trying to keep going. I just need some help. Have you talked to Michael? She asked. Not yet. Well, you should. That boy never complains. He's had every reason to be bitter, and yet he always keeps to himself, handles his business. You could learn a thing or two from him. I stared at the floor, jaw tightening. Rachel, I'm asking you. Not Michael, I understand that, but I can't help you this time. I've got a lot going on, and honestly, I think this is something you need to figure out on your own. Okay. She added quickly, I don't mean that harshly, it's just sometimes we grow more from struggle than comfort. Right. We ended the call shortly after. No prayer, no kind words, no ask if I was okay, just a vague moral lesson and a redirect. A few hours later, I checked Facebook. Rachel had posted a photo of herself standing in front of a beach house in Naples, Florida. A new place. She was holding a glass of white wine, smiling wide with a caption that read, Blessed to start this new chapter. Grateful for everything God provides. The post had over 100 likes. People from church, old co-workers, family, friends, all congratulating her on her new home, her next adventure. She had just bought a second house, and she was telling me to be more like Michael. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was the hypocrisy, the way she cloaked her rejection in moral superiority, as if struggling made me weak and pretending not to struggle made Michael a hero. I closed the app and walked to the window. The sky over Minneapolis was gray and still. I could see my own reflection in the glass. I didn't look defeated. I looked clear. One left. Michael lived in a small duplex on the east side of St. Paul, a neighborhood that hadn't changed much since the 90s. His place was tucked between an auto shop and a bakery, quiet and plain. I hadn't been over in more than a year. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give myself a chance to back out. I just drove over and knocked on his door around 7 p.m. He opened it after a few seconds, still in his work boots, sleeves rolled up, eyes steady. Hey, he said. Hey. He stepped aside to let me in. The place smelled like fresh coffee and something fried, maybe bacon or sausage. The furniture was simple, clean, lived in. A small stack of books sat on the counter, mostly history and philosophy. You hungry? I shook my head. He motioned for me to sit anyway. I dropped onto the worn leather armchair near the window, suddenly aware of how nervous I was. Michael didn't talk much, and when he did, it was never small talk. What's going on? He asked, sitting on the edge of the couch. I hesitated, then told him the story. Lost my job, out of savings, rent due. I needed a short-term loan, $5,000 to get through the month. He didn't blink, didn't frown, just reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and slid a credit card onto the coffee table between us. Use it, he said. Take what you need. Don't say anything. I stared at the card. Michael, don't say anything. He repeated, his voice even but firm. There was no hesitation, no questions, no sermon, just action. My chest tightened. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the same expression I remembered from when we were kids. One summer when I was maybe 10 and he was 13, our parents left us alone at the cabin with barely any food. It wasn't supposed to be overnight, but they got drunk at a neighbor's party and didn't come back until morning. We had half a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a single granola bar. Michael cut the bar in half and gave me the bigger piece. Didn't say a word about it. That memory hit me like a freight train. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. "Because you do it for me. You don't know that." "I do," he said. "You're a better man than most of them. You just don't see it because they convinced you otherwise." I couldn't speak. He leaned back, rubbed a hand over his jaw, then looked out the window. "People think I'm cold because I don't say much, but I see things. I always have." I nodded slowly, trying to breathe around the knot in my throat. "Thank you." He didn't smile, just gave a small shrug. "Family's not blood, it's who shows up." I left a few minutes later, card in my wallet, heart heavier and lighter at the same time. Of all the people I expected to turn me away, he was the one I thought most likely to say no. And yet he hadn't hesitated for a second. The one person not bound to me by blood had shown the most love. That truth sat with me all the way home, unmoving and deep. The test was over. I asked Michael to meet me at Birchwood Cafe on a quiet Sunday morning. The place was almost empty except for a couple with a baby and two college students with laptops. He walked in wearing the same worn flannel shirt and boots from work, nodded once when he saw me, and slid into the booth across from me. He ordered black coffee, no food. I sipped mine slowly, hands wrapped around the warm mug, trying to find the words. "There's something I need to tell you," I said finally, my voice low. "Okay. You remember when I said I lost my job, that I was broke?" He nodded once. That part was true. I really did get fired, but not because of poor performance. I blew the whistle on Nixora for financial fraud. They let me go the next week. He leaned back slightly, eyebrows raised but still calm. "What I didn't tell you," I continued, "is that 2 weeks later I bought a lottery ticket. Powerball. I wasn't even thinking. Just grabbed it at a gas station on a bad day." He said nothing, just waited. I won. 33.5 million, after taxes. A beat of silence. Michael blinked once slowly, then leaned forward. "You're serious?" I nodded. "I haven't told anyone. Not even Ryan. Only my lawyer knows." I needed time to think. And the more I thought, the more I realized how much I didn't know who was real around me. He tilted his head slightly. "So you tested them, all of them? My parents, Amy, Rachel, Sophie?" He didn't speak, just looked at me with that quiet intensity of his. "And you," I added. Still nothing. Then finally he spoke. "I'm glad you still trust me." That was all he said. No lecture, no praise, no questions about the money, just that. I stared at him, overwhelmed by how simple and solid his loyalty was. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm. "You've always wanted to start your own software company, right?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Yeah." Why, I reached into my jacket pocket and slid an envelope across the table. "What's this title to a house in Summit Hill?" "Fully paid. In your name." Michael's lips parted slightly, but he didn't reach for the envelope. "You're giving me a house." "Not just that. I've also invested $250,000 into a startup fund. It's under your name. For your company. No strings." He sat back slowly, staring at the envelope like it might bite. "Why?" "Because you've never asked for anything, and because you were the only one who gave without flinching. I didn't need to know who loved me when things were good. I needed to know who'd stay when everything looked bad." He finally picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Michael nodded slowly, then tucked the envelope into his coat. He didn't smile, just gave that same quiet nod of acceptance I'd come to expect from him. It meant more than any thank you. We sat in silence for a while, letting the hum of the cafe fill the space. Then he stood and reached across the table, gripping my shoulder. "If this whole thing taught you who's real, then maybe it was worth it." I nodded, holding his gaze. It was. From March through August, I became someone else entirely. Quiet, methodical, invisible. With the help of Mark, my attorney, I set up a shell company registered in Delaware. It looked like any other private investment firm, clean paper trail, neutral naming. Nothing that traced back to me. Through that entity, we began buying shares in Nexora. Small portions at first, spread across multiple brokers, nothing that would draw attention. But each week, another piece of the company came under my control. Nexora hadn't gone public yet, but they had private equity investors and a board that held regular votes. The moment I reached the threshold for voting power, I requested access to board-level meetings. Mark handled the legal steps, and by late August, I had accumulated just over 18% ownership. That was enough. The annual shareholder meeting was held at a bland conference room in downtown Minneapolis. Claire Jameson, the CEO, opened the meeting with her usual bright smile and carefully rehearsed optimism. She talked about projected growth, strategic partnerships, new product launches. Her voice was polished and confident, the same voice that had lied to my face the day she fired me. I waited until the Q&A portion at the end. Mark stood up and requested time on the agenda as a representative of one of the newer major shareholders. Claire hesitated just slightly, then forced a smile. "Of course. Go ahead." I walked to the front. Heads turned. A few board members recognized me. Claire's face changed the moment she saw mine. She masked it quickly, but not quickly enough. I introduced myself and explained the ownership structure. Then I pulled out a black binder and placed it on the podium. Inside this binder are documents detailing internal financial fraud committed by the current executive team. These include falsified revenue reports, misappropriated investor funds, and manipulated product testing data. Claire stood up. "This is absurd. Who do you think you are?" I ignored her. "I was a senior financial analyst here. I saw the books. When I raised questions, I was terminated without cause. I've spent the last 6 months gathering proof, speaking with other employees, and verifying documents. I handed copies of the reports to every board member in the room. Mark followed behind me, distributing printed spreadsheets, email chains, audit trails. "These are not accusations," I continued. "They are facts, verified by third-party auditors and corroborated by internal whistleblowers." There was a long silence. Claire's voice trembled when she finally spoke again. "This is character assassination. We'll have our legal team." "You'll have to find a new legal team," I said calmly, "because your old one was aware of this and did nothing. I have emails from your general counsel confirming knowledge of these discrepancies." By the end of the meeting, the board had voted unanimously to remove Claire Jameson as CEO. 2 other executives were placed on immediate administrative leave pending further investigation. I didn't ask to take over the company. I didn't want the spotlight or the title. I made one request. I want Alan Rosner reinstated as CEO, effective immediately. Alan had been my mentor at Nexora, a kind, honest man who'd quietly resigned after clashing with Claire's methods. I knew he hadn't left by choice. 3 weeks later, Alan was back in the office. I met him privately, explained everything. He didn't ask why I'd done it. He just shook my hand and said, "Thank you for remembering who we were before she changed it." That night, I walked past the building on 5th Street where I used to work. The lights on the 14th floor were still on, but the air felt cleaner, lighter. Some people believed revenge was petty. I didn't. Not when it brought truth to light, not when it gave good people their chance again. The next step was closure, not just emotionally, but officially. I met with Mark in his office on a gray Tuesday morning. We drafted 6 letters, each one personalized, legally sound, and final. The recipients were the same: Robert Miller, Linda Miller, Amy Miller, Rachel Thompson, and Sophie Reynolds. People who at one point or another I had believed were part of my inner circle. The letters weren't angry, they weren't vengeful, they were simple. Each one included a legal statement disinheriting them from any current or future holdings under my estate. It detailed the amount of my lottery winnings, current assets, and trusts, followed by the clause that they would receive nothing. I signed each letter in silence. No hesitation, no lingering doubt. I asked Mark to have them sent by courier, hand-delivered. No delay, no room for misunderstanding. Each envelope also contained a brief personal note, just one sentence. To my father, I used to believe your approval was worth earning. Now I know silence speaks louder than love. To my mother, I never needed your money, I just wanted your effort. You gave neither. To Amy, family isn't a brand you wear on vacation. It's what you give when no one's looking. To Rachel, you were right about one thing. Michael never complains, and maybe that's why he was the only one who listened. To Sophie, you wanted to know where we stood. Now you do. It wasn't love, it was convenience. And to myself quietly, after sealing the last envelope, I don't owe anyone more than truth. That night I shut off my phone. I deleted their numbers. I archived old texts, photos, voicemails. Not in anger, but because I was done rereading a book that never had my name on the cover. The next morning I walked around Lake Harriet, hands deep in my jacket pockets, air crisp, sun just beginning to rise. It felt like breathing for the first time after being underwater too long. No more checking if they'd change, no more hoping they'd remember birthdays or return calls or show up when it wasn't convenient. I wasn't bitter. I was free. The past had shown me everything I needed to know, and now it could stay where it belonged. Behind me, we named it Second Start. Michael and I spent months working out of coffee shops, libraries, and eventually a rented co-working space in St. Paul. The idea was simple: teach coding, digital literacy, and job readiness to people who had nothing, people who'd been pushed aside, formerly incarcerated individuals, veterans, people sleeping in shelters, the overlooked. I poured the first $500,000 from my lottery winnings into the foundation. Michael handled the curriculum and partnerships. I focused on the structure, legalities, and funding. Ryan came in naturally, helping manage operations and mentoring. He was steady, patient, always reminding us why we started when the logistics got messy. We partnered with local tech firms for internships and job placements. We hired counselors, set up mental health resources, created a daycare system for parents attending training. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, tangible, and it was ours. One day, almost 2 years after the first planning meeting, I stood at the back of a small auditorium inside our first permanent training center. Folded chairs, scuffed floors, hand-painted signs on the walls. 34 people were graduating that day, 34 stories of resilience. One woman was 62, had lived in her car for 6 years, and just got hired as a data entry coordinator. A young man who had aged out of foster care had secured a web design internship. Another graduate was moving to Seattle for a tech support role at a major company. I stood there, suit jacket, loose tie, slightly off-center, watching them laugh, hug, cry. Watching their families and friends take pictures, watching possibility unfold. Then someone called my name. David, a few words. I walked up slowly, microphone in hand. The room quieted. I used to think money would fix things, that success meant status, recognition, control, but the truth is, when I had nothing, I learned everything I needed to know. About people, about loyalty, about what mattered. Michael sat in the front row, Ryan beside him. You don't need $1 million to change a life, you just need to care enough to act. And sometimes when you've lost everything, the right people show up. The ones who see you. That's the gift I got, and I hope in some way this program gives that gift forward. Applause filled the room warm and long. I stepped back, letting the celebration take over. Laughter, clapping, cheers, no press, no spotlight, just the sound of beginnings. Later, as I helped fold chairs, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She held a worn journal in one hand, the program booklet in the other. "Thank you," she said, "not just for the classes, for believing in us before we believed in ourselves." I didn't have the right words, I just nodded and smiled. That night, walking home under the amber streetlights, I felt no weight, no bitterness, just a quiet peace. The past had closed its door, and in front of me something better had opened. If you've ever been hurt by the people closest to you, if you've ever been left wondering who would still be there when everything fell apart, tell your story. You're not alone.